On the other hand, the partner figure may complement the ego with valuable shadow characteristics. The German writer Jean Paul was very fond of such twins, who are the central motif of most of his stories. He says of one pair of identical twins that, quote, love made their faces unlike each other. That's it. Love made their faces unlike, so we get complementarity with doubleness. You see, the breeders just talk about that's the only way they do it. You got to be the breeder to get it going. That's the classic criticism of same-sex love. It's narcissistic, Freud would say. It's just the thing mirroring itself. How is it that love is always procreative? How can love between those of the same gender be procreative? You see, this is a great mystery. It's obvious with breeders how that's so. But this is a great mystery in terms of how that's so when we're desirous in the same way, so to speak, through the desire of romantic bonding of the genitals themselves with someone of the same genitals themselves. How is that parallel to, that is also human, but not the same as the breeder's way of doing that, and what that amounts to, in terms of what the breeders think of these things. Let's see, so can someone remind me, where was I?
On page 4, the last sentence.
Last sentence of the bottom.
The German writer. Yep. Oh, right there. Love made their faces unlike each other's, that's it. The German writer Jean Paul was very fond of such twins, who are the central motif of most of his stories. He says of one pair of identical twins that, quote, love made their faces unlike each other's. Each saw in the other only what he loved outside himself, unquote. So you can see how people of the same sex project desires into each other, fulfillment, as well as subsequent contrary sex. The competitor who brings madness, murder, suicide was a favorite theme among romantic and post-romantic Western writers, and I list a whole bunch of writers, just examples where this theme was very popular, as you can see, a long list, including Hans Andersen and Dostoevsky, and even Oscar Wilde wrote on this theme, among many others. It was a very popular theme at the time Mary Shelley was writing her novel. All through this century, it was very not uncommon to see this theme discussed in literary form. Okay. If we can say that today's society is practically soulless, then we might describe England in 1818 as the place where the soul first began to disappear in earnest. Of course, no, I would write all of this discussion. Much study has been done of all of this stuff. But what I'm reading to you now is a kind of almost my own scholarly construction of understanding, which later on lots of standard historians have discussed these matters that I will be reading out here. The time I wrote them, however, this was not true. This stuff had not been put together in these kinds of ways, or at least not very clearly. That, again, letting you know things are like 30 years ago around these notions, but now typically understood to be approximately like the way I'm describing them. Not in terms of societies now soulless, and that's the soullessness started with industrialization, really, which first started in England, so on and so forth. They wouldn't discuss it in those ways, of course, because they're not Jungians, they're not interested in the psychological understanding, historians, I mean. If you can say that today's society is practically soulless, then we might describe England in 1818 as the place where the soul first began to disappear in earnest. The Napoleonic Wars were just over. Industrialism and imperialism were moving into high gear. Society demanded great entrepreneurial capitalists and bold, aggressive administrators with few moral qualms. Social roles, and especially sex roles, were being locked into exaggerated norms as people braced themselves for vast material changes. The age reeked with moral dogmatism and hypocrisy. Against this tide, the rebellious romantics wrote poems and painted pictures, but their cause was very unpopular. Mary's lover, Percy Shelley, was, quote, reviled as a monster, unquote, by most of the English, unquote. It was into this milieu that Mary Shelley introduced Frankenstein in his creation. We are told that Frankenstein was the son of a prominent citizen of Geneva. His childhood was very happy, and he grew up surrounded by gentle, loving parents, siblings, and friends. However, at an early age, he became devoted to unlocking, quote, the secrets of heaven and earth, the inner spirit of nature, and the mysterious soul of man. I'm suggesting you all evening that's the traditional provenance of sexually queer folks, especially those who are most queer, aka what we now call homosexuals. For this reason, the mysterious soul of man. It's his code words. Again. These are code words. The secrets of heaven and earth means some man's hot dick while I'm coming. So that doesn't mean literal sex. It means that ecstatic Elysium that brings me into because of following out that desire. As you might all know that personally. That's the code being referenced here. I want to invite you always to appreciate something like this novel, Frankenstein. It's funny. It's actually very campy that way. Vicious, fierce, but very, very strong statement that way. So the mysterious old man, I quote, while away at college, what soon to then be Dr. Frankenstein discovers the new physical sciences, and with them the means to realize his dreams. You know, again, realize his dreams. Ha ha ha. During his researches, he comes upon a great secret. The ability of, quote, bestowing animation upon lifeless matter, you know? Imagine if your dick was not supposed to get hard with another dick person. You might want to keep it lifeless too. It might be a daring scientific experiment. Voltaire was the one who said, once a scientist, twice a homosexual. He actually said that. It's a real quote from Voltaire. Once a scientist, you figure it out. Once a scientist, twice homosexual. Voltaire said that in the Enlightenment. Okay, bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. Don't tell me when I said this. You know, you ruined everyone's reputation. He resolves to create a human being. Imagine, like, the first time I went in a gay bar, how many times I went around the block. He resolves to create a human being. Imagine, like, so see, he actually brought someone home, so to speak, you know. Just imagine it metaphorical, because it wants to bring in this mysterious, metaphysical aspect of same-sex desire, which is not there in heterosexual desire, not there in heterosexual desire, but intrinsically, if one is open enough to the feeling of it, is there intrinsically in same-sex desire. That's been easily noted in other times and places. It didn't have the kind of bigotry or particular cultural tradition it has had. So he resolves to create a human being. After months of the most intense work, meaning struggling with his shame, his fear, his personal inadequacy, as you and I have done, quote, on a dreary night of November, unquote, right, he makes a breakthrough, probably with a dick, you know, and has a homosexual panic. I'll just jump ahead, right? You get the idea. He gives life to a body built with his own hands. But at the very moment the creature opens his eyes, quote, breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Picture, I don't know about you, but when I was still officially a bisexual, I couldn't handle it being fully out. I would sometimes date or go on a date or be with a guy who would also claim to be bisexual, and this would often happen to them if the lights went up too soon, for example, or things became obvious in some kind of way, you know, that they're to others around what the other person might be fooling around with. They'd suddenly become totally different or something like that. That's what I'm reminded of by this point here. Quote, his breathless horror, so to speak. He sees what he's doing. As is truly, in the eyes of the group, a mind, horrifying, disgusting. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room. Unquote. So here's an example of a man who failed to be gay, so to speak. And they didn't have those labels back then, they didn't have these kind of words back then. But this is that, and that's what went on purpose. But again, it's trying to emphasize how that ruins, since the rest of the story, the mantra then ruins Dr. Frankenstein's life, his regular life right now. And you see how that then follows from Dr. Frankenstein's cowardice of the picture of the creature, the creation, as actually this kind of numinous intent that Dr. Frankenstein should individuate through his own homosexual desire, not renounce it. And that creature now has been turned from the double lover into the competitor, the hateful competitor, and is now going to make all this terrible trouble for him. Dr. Frankenstein sees his creature as the most ugly thing in the world. He exclaims that, quote, no mortal could support the horror of that countenance. A mummy, again endued with animation, could not be so hideous, unquote. As he lapses into a deep, quote, nervous fever. How many times have we heard that? I don't hear that so much anymore, you know. Oh my God, that homosexual came on to me. I lapsed into a nervous fever. I mean, he wouldn't speak that way now. The picture, 200 years ago. The ones who didn't want to get caught saying, I'm a gay, you know, I'm a homosexual. That's what they say. I lapse into a deep nervous fever. And now they're safe. You know, the police pass over them, the angel of death pass over them. And God goes for the one who confesses or the one who's obvious. You see the terrible problem back then, because they'll actually kill you. They'll kill you for this. It's a terrible thing, you know, even though the novel is in the form of a fantasy. As Dr. Frankenstein lapses into a deep, quote, nervous fever, unquote, his creation blindly wanders out into the surrounding forest, half to fend for his own. So, in other words, what happens to poor Dr. Frankenstein's desire for same-sex love when it's been rejected by the doctor himself, who wants it? He doesn't want to reject his need for this love. It's much more sincere than whatever he's got home with his charming wife and his father and the rest of the normal life of his. But he obviously can't handle it. So I will continue to read on it. And now we discovered the great contradiction in this tale. For it turns out that contrary to his appearance, the creature is a deeply sensitive, kind, generous being. As he tells us after learning to speak, quote, I was benevolent. My soul glowed with love and humanity, unquote. He's even a pacifist and a vegetarian. But everywhere he turns, people run screaming from him. They beat him and shoot at him for no reason as soon as they see him. He feels utterly unloved, utterly alone and abandoned. Then his bewilderment and pain gradually give way to hatred. Quote, the mildness of my nature had fled, and all within me was turned to gall and bitterness, unquote. The creature vows revenge, as he tells Dr. Frankenstein, quote, if I cannot inspire love in you, I will cause fear, and chiefly toward you, my archenemy, because my creator, do I swear inextinguishable hatred, unquote. So, of course, in this very romantic sense, hatred and love are next door neighbors. The creature then goes about destroying those Frankenstein loves most, his brother, his best friend, his bride, and his father, after which he leaves Frankenstein to his own death on the Arctic seas. This is often shown as some picture on the cover of often the book version of Frankenstein shows the Arctic by itself, or often painting with Dr. Frankenstein. Dr. Frankenstein dared to delve below the shallow, mundane world of middle-class propriety and triviality, which I'm suggesting was quite the thing at the time for members of his class. The members of his family and his friends, indeed Frankenstein himself, are charming, good-hearted, thoroughly cardboard figures. They're wrapped up in the false society of the collectivity of that time. Elizabeth, Frankenstein's beloved, is the daughter of a merchant whose interests center on children and household furnishings. What a fascinating wife she would have made. I can't wait for her. Actually, this poor homosexual person and this have to be fake heterosexual body, right? You know, and this is going to be your wife, right? It's going to be your life at home. You know, it's like, hey, first. Henry, his best friend, also a merchant's son, wants to assist, quote, the progress of European colonization and trade, unquote, in India. Well, that's sweet of him. Isn't he a nice good fellow? None of the characters in Frankenstein, with one exception, has any idea of the reality of being a human being, a real person, right? They have no depth, no substance, no soul. That's why I'm arguing this in my position of what makes this novel. These characters actually have what I call here soulfulness. And that exception, of course, is the creature, the monster. In relation to his creator, this creature is more imaginative, more intellectual, more emotional, in short, quote, more human, unquote. I think that's maybe from Howard Bloom. In a penetrating way, he reveals how heartless and short-sighted people are. What he calls, quote, the barbarity of man, unquote. He is, in fact, the soul, that which Frankenstein lacks. As the character Waltman, another character who's got like this analog, or put in a parallel position to Dr. Frankenstein, an analog of Frankenstein, says to his sister at the very beginning of the novel is presented as nested within letters by this Walton character to his sister. And he befriends Frankenstein on the ice below the North Pole. And then the doctor relates his story, and that's the bulk of the novel, that's the novel structure. So this is from one of these early letters that Walton writes to his sister. But, quote, but I have one want, which I have never yet been able to satisfy, in the absence of the object of which I now feel as a most severe evil. I desire the company of a man who could sympathize with me, whose eyes could reply to mine. I bitterly feel the want of a friend. I have no one near me, gentle yet courageous, possessive and cultivated, as well as of a capacious mind whose tastes are like my own, to approve or amend my plans. How would such a friend repair the faults of your poor brother? Unquote. Notice again, there's nothing below the waist.